Abenaki, people from where the sun rises. The Delawares, as Abenaki, were the grandfathers of all other nations because they were the first to receive the light of the sun rising over the sea. This was the East, where life begins. Our people traveled all over their vast territory, and they also cultivated the land.
Rights to the Dawnland. Abenaki land rights in colonial New France and New England. French recognition of Abenaki land rights greatly contrasted with the British disregard for their rights to their land. This led to most Abenaki people choosing to accept the responsibility of an alliance with the French in exchange for recognition of their sovereignty and land rights. This commitment to support the French helped the Allies survive longer in the 7 Years' War and led to mass migrations to New France. The legacy of this partnership continues to be seen in the major concentration of the Abenaki people in French Canada. Long before French and English colonists came to the Americas, the Abenaki occupied the Dawnland, which is now known as northern New England, consisting of these states: Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The Abenaki consist of many different groups with different names, but all united by language and geography. They lived a partly nomadic lifestyle. During the brief growing periods of the Dawnland, the Abenaki settled in place and farmed the fertile field. However, when the weather became too cold and harsh for farming, they split up into smaller family bands. They heavily valued the importance of their land. Having first been settled over 11,000 years ago, the land held sacred significance, the bones of their ancestors, and an essential part of their everyday life. From an Abenaki speech given to the French priests in the 1700s, "This land we inhabit is ours. What it produces is the fruit of our labor. Dig into it and you'll find the bones of our ancestors." Even before extended contact with European settlers around the mid-1600s, the sheer presence of the Europeans in the Americas caused many problems for the Abenaki, such as disease, famine, and intertribal warfare, which decimated the population and weakened the remaining Abenaki. Disease traveled up through the native trade routes, affecting villages as it went. A long-standing rivalry between the Abenaki and the Iroquois was made worse by the increasing competition for beaver pelts to trade with the French. Many natives from other tribes came north seeking refuge from the English and Abenaki lands. The Abenaki were also increasingly vulnerable to invasion by the English from the south, the French from the north, and the Iroquois from the west. When the French and English arrived in Abenaki lands, they had different motivations which affected their relationships with the Abenaki. The British, having been crowded out of the Massachusetts Bay colonies, came north looking for more farmland from the Dawnland. They competed for land with the natives and often took traditional Abenaki farmlands. The French, on the other hand, came to the Dawnland searching for trade partners in pelts. The French also brought Jesuit priests who wanted to convert the natives. Their motivations fostered a more collaborative spirit with the Abenaki. The Abenaki rarely engaged in negotiation with the French and the English. They leased land to both of them, however they did not believe in selling the land and maintained that as their land by right as a result of having been occupied by their ancestors for thousands of years. The French and the English had very different attitudes towards the land rights of the Abenaki people. The French generally respected Abenaki land rights, making a point of recognizing Abenaki sovereignty and requesting permission to use the land, while the English viewed the Abenaki as subjects and the Abenaki land as unclaimed wilderness. The French recognized the right of the Abenaki people to the land, making sure to request permission from the Abenaki people before setting up sawmills, trading posts, and other similar things. The French frequently used their recognition of the Abenaki sovereignty as a bargaining chip to gain their alliance. They offered the Abenaki recognition of their land rights and even protection of those rights under the French crown, in exchange for the responsibility of the Abenaki fighting alongside them to protect French interests. In correspondence amongst themselves, the French made a point of addressing the importance of recognizing the Abenaki land rights as a tool for securing their alliance. For example, a memorandum to Versailles stated, "If we do not agree or do not pretend to agree to their rights over the country in which they occupy, never will we be able to engage them in any war for the defense of this same country, which is the first line of defense of Canada." No matter the reason, the recognition of the Abenaki's right to the land was well received by the Abenaki, and many Abenaki people allied with the French as a result of that recognition. On the other hand, the English largely ignored Abenaki land rights, claiming that the land was unoccupied and undeveloped because they didn't occupy the same spot year-round. They ignored the fact that the Abenaki cultivate the land and return to the same spot each year. They repeatedly titled treaties with the Abenaki as acts of submission, and insisted that the Abenaki admit to supposed wrongdoings in exchange for being able to use their own land. Although in some treaties, such as the Articles of Pacification and the New Hampshire Provincial Papers, they allowed the Abenaki to occupy land near their claims, it was under strict conditions, and if the Abenaki were ever to leave the land, it would be taken as an act of war against the English. The English used complicated bureaucratic processes to justify their land claims, and despite the challenges in understanding them, members of the Abenaki tribes continued trying to fight them, even in the court system. In the Indian explanation of the treaty at Casco Bay in 1727, an Abenaki representative came forward to explain the Indian perspective on that treaty, exposing misunderstandings and deceit, and the differences between what the English record as having happened and what the Indians remember as having happened. In meetings between the Abenaki and the English in 1752, Chief Speaker Atiwaneto addressed Phineas Stevens and his company, stating that they had not sold their lands and the English were not to touch them, alleging that the English had been using the land and staking claims without their permission. The speech also spoke lovingly of their alliance with the King of France. The Abenaki people had no centralized government, so individual family bands could make their own decisions on how to interact with the colonists. However, due to the vastly different attitudes of the French and the British in regards to Abenaki land rights, many Abenaki chose to ally with the French and receive recognition of their land rights in exchange for the responsibility of French allegiance. This alliance between the Abenaki and the French was regularly a source of concern for the English. During this time, the borders of New France and New England were fluid and non-permanent, and this alliance between the Abenaki and the French helped the French hold off the English and extend the 7 Years' War. The recognition of the land rights of the Abenaki by the French in exchange for the responsibility of their help against the Iroquois and the English strengthened the Franco-Abenaki connection. The French and the Abenaki lived side by side, marrying amongst one another and melding their cultures. Many Abenaki converted to Catholicism, combining it with their native spiritual practices. This connection solidified their alliance and horrified the English. English Reverend Cotton Mather derided the melding of the cultures, referring contemptuously to the Abenaki as Frenchified Indians, and denounced their war parties as being half one and half the other, half Indianized French and half Frenchified Indians. As allies of the French, the Abenaki fought alongside them on the American front of the 7 Years' War. This strengthened the French forces and allowed them to fight longer against the English. This prolonging to the war and the added manpower of the Abenaki people weakened the English. The weakening of the English during the 7 Years' War caused the English to raise taxes on the colonies in order to cover their expenses from the war. These taxes led to rebellion in the colonies and the Revolutionary War. The weakened English lost the Revolutionary War, leading to the creation of the United States of America. Despite the key role that the Abenaki played in weakening the English, the new United States of America refused to recognize the land rights of the Abenaki people. This led to many prolonged legal battles for the Abenaki people who stayed, and a mass migration of Abenaki people to Quebec, where they could live alongside their longtime allies. As a result of this, there are many fewer Abenaki people in modern northern New England than once lived here, and a much greater concentration of Abenaki people reside in modern-day Quebec.